I want to tell you a couple more stories, because I think stories are really the best way to convey these types of traditions to an audience, is because that's actually how we learn about these things too in the Pennsylvania Dutch culture. We don't learn about them from books, we learn about them from our relatives. We hear stories, and the stories tell us about how we should be thinking about ourselves, because when you hear a story about healing, it changes the way that you think about your own body and your own spirit. And it also gives you the opportunity to reflect and think about, if this was effective for one of my relatives, maybe it would be effective for me. And so I find that especially stories are one of the best ways to deal with this. I mentioned Stanley Brunner as being a doctor who also powwowed, who also engaged in these traditions. But I also know of some stories of doctors that didn't like these traditions. And I'll tell one that a good friend of mine who passed away last year, John Messner, told me. He was from Charlottesville, which is western Berks County, right up along the Route 78 corridor, heading west in the direction of Lebanon. So in Charlottesville, there is the Charlottesville Hotel, and the Charlottesville Hotel was kind of like the center of civic life in Charlottesville. It was a country hotel. It was where you would find out about the news. It was where you would sit down at the end of a long season of work and sit down and have a beer and tell stories. So a lot of things would happen at these local hotels. They're very important features for the culture. Well, John was describing that it was Mother's Day, and of course the hotel is always hopping because people go out for Mother's Day. Well, in the process of accommodating all of the people who were going out to eat at the Charlottesville Hotel, and this was in the 40s, there was a lot of hustling going on. And there was a young girl who was bussing tables, and she cut her hand on a glass that broke while bussing tables. And it was pretty bad, it was really deep. So they called the doctor, and the doctor was visiting the doctor's mother. So the doctor wasn't even available, didn't answer the phone. The doctor's wife was there, but said, yeah, he's visiting his mother. So they were worried about what to do, because this young girl was losing a lot of blood. So my friend John's father was well known as a healer. He was a braucher, which is the Pennsylvania Dutch word for a healer, one who treats with medicine in this case. And he said to her, he took her aside and just said, I can help you if you would like. And she said, okay, whatever, because she had this thing all wrapped up, and she kept having to change the dressings because she was getting blood all over the place. And he took her aside, and he very, very softly chanted some words. And what I heard from John was that he used a verse from Scripture, which is one of the most common ways that people would stop bleeding. There are many, many ways to do it, but this just happens to be one of them. And it's a verse from Ezekiel chapter 16, verse 6. No, chapter 16, verse 6, yes. And it goes something like this in the original King James. When I passed by thee and saw thee polluted in thine own blood, I said unto thee, when thou wast in thy blood, live. Yea, when thou wast in thy blood, live. And he made the sign of the cross 3 times and repeated it 3 times. He also had asked her of her first, middle, and last name. And he would say her name after saying yea, and then he would say her full name. The belief in this case is you're actually identifying the person. You are calling down a blessing, so to speak, on that person. And there are some practitioners who actually use that term, calling a blessing on a person. Well, John's father went into the corner and did this very quietly. He kept out of sight. He wasn't trying to put on a show. And the bleeding stopped, and she put a bandage around her hand, and she kept working. Well, meanwhile, the doctor finds out that there's somebody bleeding to death at the Charlottesville Hotel, and shows up all worried, ready basically to put stitches in and do everything else. And he goes to examine the girl, and everything's fine, and he sees the way people are looking at him, and he also figures out what had happened while he was away, because he looks at John's father and openly says to him in front of other people at the restaurant, "Ik weet wat u gedoe." And that means, I know what you did. And the implication is, I don't approve of it. Because in this case, this particular doctor was an educated doctor from out of the area who had moved to Charlottesville, but did not approve of these traditions. So you're going to find a wide variety of different attitudes towards health and healing, not only within the culture of those people who engage in these traditions, but those who may or may not approve of them. It's really fascinating to me, though, because oftentimes what you're really going to find is that these forms of healing are not in competition, but they're really a complement to conventional medicine. And that's usually the kind of story that you're going to hear.